South African authorities have suspended several initiation schools where boys have died in recent weeks after taking part in circumcision ceremonies. Kofi, I'll come to you first because you've written a book about the darker side of Ghana, where you look at the culture aspect and the impact it's had on countries, especially Ghana. And this is a ritual that happens in South Africa to a particular tribe, where boys between the ages of 15 to 17, they go away and they go through this ritual of being circumcised. It has come to notice that a lot of boys, young boys, have died as a result of these rituals. Where do you stand on this, Kofi?
To be clear, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a word or two on this particular subject.
Yeah.
You see, I think we are seriously misunderstanding the concept of culture. And because of that, instead of seeing it as a mechanism for a people's survival, by which we can be able to know why this was introduced in the first place, in the past, the challenges they have, whether those challenges are still now, for this approach to be used in mass circumcising male children, as they did in the past, for it to continue to be the case now, is a bit challenging. Again, in the past, they don't have medical facilities to carry out circumcision if they have to. You know, there was no centralized government that is responsible for the health and safety of the citizens. Now, South Africans have got government.
Yeah.
Now, so the darker side, as I've always said, you see, they have their own, if you go and check, you see that they have politicians, the laws that make this circumcision the issue, the institutions that are there to carry it out, right? And it's a tradition that they have been doing, and historically, they have justification for it.
Yeah.
Now, this is what we call the darker side. Those institutions exist in South Africa, very active. At the same time, the modern day institutions also exist.
Yeah.
So are we now going to say that if children are dying because their parents are taking them to people who think they are above the law? Because I'm sure in South Africa, there will be clear law on issues like this. Now, people are dying, and you have people who are involved in the act. What is done to them? What did the law say should be done? Or do we say, let's turn blind eye? Because it's tradition. So we should allow tradition to have its way, when actually the modern day tradition of South Africa might be frowning at the same thing.
Kofi has touched on law. And when you read the story in the South African Constitution, everyone has the right to practice their culture. So this is where it is very difficult, because people have spoken about it saying it is outdated, but it is in the Constitution.
Well, the thing is, whether there's law or not, the culture kind of comes first. Because when we talk about culture, you go all the way back, the way things used to be before. Even in South Africa, the apartheid system came. Children were still, boys were still being circumcised, whether it's a traditional Zulu, traditional, or any other kind of tribal practices. They were there before. And you know, there's what I've witnessed in Africa, across board in Africa, is clash between different cultures, because there's a traditional culture, but also there's a way things are being done right now. And also the systems right now, like, I'll give you an example. If you go to a country like Kenya, there is circumcision through the hospitals. There's also circumcision through churches.
Okay.
A church can organize a mass circumcision. Then there's a typical traditional cultural, so sensitive, the way it used to be done a long time ago, whereby people go to stay on their own for some time, and they come out believing they are no longer boys now, they are men.
And this is what's happening right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So these aspects of circumcision have kept on changing at the moment, because modern times, right? Before in traditional setup, you got to be circumcised if you are boys. Your parents and the groupings of involved, they will take you to a river very early in the morning. You take a cold shower. That's kind of sterilizer. before you go through the whole process. And there was no medical current equivalent, but that was the time. That's the way it used to be. Yeah. But it was done in a way that was very controlled. There were no reports of deaths or anything, and it was happening all the time. But right now, because of the emergency of hospital circumcisions, all these other groupings coming up, let us do it as a group, come up. The problem we have in modern society, everything is commercialized. And that's where the abuses come.
Kofi,
you engage someone who doesn't know how to do it, but because it's got to be done.
Yeah. So it has been reported that the young men were dying of dehydration and also wounds going septic, pointed to the lack of proper care. Now, there's a bigger issue here, because when you read the story, it says that although there are hospitals in South Africa where the locals can access these hospitals, they feel as though they're being westernized. So they rather stay with their culture. Where in this case, when the young boys go up to the bush to go through the rituals, there's a nurse and a doctor looking after them.
I think we're having a big problem here. And I've always had that problem whenever I'm engaging with people.
Yeah.
We put a word on the table and we assume our understanding of the word is the same. And so we are looking at the word differently. And that is a bit on itself a problem. Because until we know what we are all talking about, he said culture, you said culture, I said culture. Do we really mean the same thing? We are all talking about different things. You will realize that some people, when they say culture, they mean the olden way of doing things. Right. But culture is supposed to be evolving, catching up with time.
But according to this is the olden ways of
fine. Then we said, right? Yesterday, this is how it's done.
Yes.
For example, go to Ghana. We are not talking about ancient people in Ghana. There are modern people born now.
Yeah.
And therefore, we have institutions of law. Yeah, when we say people are free to practice their tradition, like we have a case of truckers in Ghana. Yeah. So we will sit down in the country and people will be raping children of 11 years and we say tradition and culture and we back off. This is where we're having a problem because we have accepted it. That, because it's their tradition, they can do what they will do. You understand? Right now, like we're talking about witchcraft by churches and so on, the state is there. The state has its law. Now there's a clash between the state's law and the law of some groups in the states. And when we say everyone is free to do what they like, are we saying they are free to take advantage of our citizens? Then we shouldn't have politicians anymore. So we are having a problem. Parliament in this country where we all live, every day they change the law. Every day they go and sit down and the law stands. So the laws they use in this country 50 or 100 years ago, if you know it, now laws have changed and they change them. They sit down. This is why you have parliament to sit down. This parliament is going to be made up of people from all the so-called cultures. It's not a people from somewhere. Okay. And they are the new South Africans. They sit down, look at the practice of where we have hospitals. And one old woman and her toothless husband sitting somewhere calling themselves witch. In fact, they are fetish spirit and witch doctors. And then they sit down and they are killing children. When you say people, there was no in the past. I don't know whether Julius said it. That in the past, there was no incident of death.
Just speak into your mic.
There was no incident of death. You understand?
Yeah.
What we are failing to realize that now we know because there are means of knowing. If there were wars were happening in the past, but they were not reported because you can capture it.
Right.
So you see, we are modern. Look at how we dress. Modern people. We should, if we want this Africa to move from where we are, and we stop blaming others and start taking responsibility, we need to be serious about what we talk about.
Julius. Because what Kofi is saying, of course, and this is where the small communities, the communities are fighting against. They're kicking against it because anything that will hinder upon their beliefs, and dare I say it again, their culture, they don't want it. So where do you go? The Constitution, I think, tried to bring both worlds, as it were, together. So you can still keep your culture at the same time, moving on, as Kofi is saying, being more modern.
The thing is, culture is dynamic.
Yeah.
It keeps on changing every time. and you cannot still stay in the same place doing the same thing over and over. I remember one time that I had a very interesting conversation with my grandpa. I was forced to do some research by a colleague journalist who made controversial statement. He came across and said, look, the way we live these days, the Christian world and religious world is not working. Let us go back to the way our culture, our tradition were before Christianity came to Africa.
Yes.
Or any other religion came to Africa. But I was like, is that practical? So I went to speak to my grandpa to find out how possible that could be. So he says to me, it can't work. He said to me, live according to your times. And then he says to me, listen, young man, in my time as your grandpa, we had big land. I could marry 20 wives.
Yeah.
We would have a place to keep them and farm.
Yes.
But in your world today is money world.
Yeah.
How much money do you have? So we cannot successfully go back to live according to the way things to be like. Yeah. Culture is dynamic. It changes all the time. Now, where we are in South Africa, that's where we are trying to keep a cultural practice in a modern way. But is it succeeding? As I gave the example from Kenya, money world tends to be a cruel world.
Yeah.
Through money world, many countries in Africa, people go to hospitals and they get misdiagnosed because of money issues. Patients are treated. They are detained in hospital for their inability to pay for the hospital bill.
Yeah.
The same thing when it comes to circumcision, where people have to spend. Abuses can happen. Now, I want to rally behind Kofi, what he said. Government is there to protect people like this. There is government. Government is there to protect. So when it comes to like a culture and you're like, okay, we have a group of 100 people who have just been circumcised. The people involved, if it's a hospital or a private group, don't tell me 2 people are enough to keep an eye on 100 people, because you want, as a company, to cut costs.
Yeah.
You have to employ the right amount of people to oversee these practices. Keep an eye on each patient. We are calling them patient because they are still in their process of healing.
Okay. All right.